Hey guys, welcome back to Medical Coding with Blue. Today's episode is all about some common mistakes people who are studying medical coding make. If you're brand new to my channel, welcome. I am Blue, I'm a medical coder. Okay guys, so when you are studying medical coding, there are a lot of things that you have to learn. There's medical terminology, there's anatomy, there's the guidelines, there's how to do the coding itself, the coding rules and all these things, right? So a lot of times what people will tell me is, they're very excited and they say, well, Blue, I am making flashcards for all of the coding guidelines. I'm making flashcards for all of the medical terms. And I've got hundreds of flashcards. I think I made too much. Yes, it is possible to make too many flashcards. So it's important to be discerning when you are making flashcards, okay? Flashcards are great. I love flashcards. I always talk about flashcards, how they are important, how you have to write them out because it helps things to stick in your mind even more. Some people will want to argue about that and say, oh no, I want to purchase a deck and just use the deck. But there's nothing like being able to just write them out yourself that makes it so much better, okay? That's just my opinion and my advice anyway. What do I know? I have been a medical coder for 15 years. I've had a total of 3 medical coding certifications. My CCA was the first one that I started with, and then of course I got my CCSP and my CCS. So I currently hold the CCSP and the CCS. So I'm speaking from experience. I've had to study a time or two, okay? So when you're making these flashcard decks, make sure that you're not writing out things that you already know, okay? If you already know these things or you're working through the workbook, you're still going to get that exposure to them. The whole idea behind flashcards is to make flashcards for the things that are not easy for you to recall. That's what you want to use the flashcards for. You don't want to use them just for everyday things that you already know, because then you're just wasting time at that point. Yes, it is about, conserving your time, conserving your energy. To study takes a tremendous amount of energy. That's why sometimes people tend to snack and do all these things while they're studying, because it's so much energy to sit there and read and think and concentrate and focus and do all of these things. So conserve your energy and just do flashcards for the things that are troubling you, okay? About the guidelines, okay? Don't write flashcards for the guidelines, because the guidelines get updated every single year. You do not have to memorize the guidelines. The ICD-10-CM official coding guidelines, you do not have to memorize those. You do not have to memorize the surgery guidelines, because you will have the books with you during the exam. These are open book tests. Open book tests. So what this means is you can look at the books while you're taking your exam, because those are a necessary component of being able to take a test, whether you're sitting for the American Health Information Management Association credential exams or the American Academy of Professional Coders. Either one of these, they're open book tests for their medical coding. So that's something that you have to know. The reason that I talk about reading the coding guidelines once per week in their entirety, if you can get there. If it takes you a couple weeks, takes you 3 weeks to get through the whole thing, that's totally fine too. The whole point is to practice reading. Practicing reading so that you can read faster, because the more you read, the faster you will get. If you tell me, well, Blue, I'm a slow reader, that's why you read, to get faster, because that's what this field is. This field is 90% reading. That's what we do in a day. Is 90% of the time we are reading. So I want you all to start reading your coding guidelines, and don't write flashcards for them, okay? Because it's not necessary, and they get updated every single year. And sometimes they delete things, they change things, and it may be very subtle in the wording that they change in the guidelines. And so again, if you're trying to write out all these 2023 guidelines and then you're going to take your test in 2024, guess what? Something may be a little bit different. And if you have those 2023 guidelines in your head without looking at your book, right, for 2024, that's where things can get a little confusing. So again, it's going to take too much time, too much energy to do those flashcards, which is unnecessary for the guidelines. So just read the guidelines. By reading the guidelines, you are putting the information in your head, because what happens is everybody has that moment of, I know I saw that somewhere. Where did I see it? When you see things, repetitively, and then, oh yeah, I know exactly where to go in the guidelines. That's the whole beauty of reading the coding guidelines once per week, or however fast you can read them. But that's the beauty of it, because it's a primer for your brain, and you'll have the answers exactly where you need to go, exactly the way that you need to see them in the book. So that's the important thing. And hopefully that can kind of save you a little bit of energy, like, oh my gosh, that is so much. Don't waste your time doing that. I'm a veteran coder, and even when I was studying for my very first exam, did I do that? Okay, so don't do that. And when it comes to medical terms, now a lot of times people will say, well, what about medical terminology, Blue? I'm writing hundreds of flashcards for that. If you are writing out whole words for medical terminology, again, another waste of time. Why? Because depending on what clinic you go into, you may not see some of those words ever. So you will have memorized them for nothing. The thing about flashcards, again, going back to the whole premise of flashcards, is to have those things in your mind that you are struggling with. So what I recommend, if you're doing those for medical terminology, prefixes, suffixes, and root words. That is what you should focus those flashcards on that you're writing out yourself. And again, guys, if you already know what the prefix, the suffix, or the root word means already, don't write one for that. Only write ones for the things that, I'm not really sure about that. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's the ones that you need to write those for. Again, it's okay to be discerning on the amount of flashcards that you write. I also recommend this, writing only 25. If you say, well, I don't know this whole thing, okay, then start with the first 25. Start with the first 25 that you don't know and write those out. And when you write those out, then you practice with those for the week, or however long. And then by the time you know it, if you're going through those repetitively for the whole week, you're going to say, okay, yeah, I got those down. So let me put these aside. Let me write out another 25. So that way it doesn't look so much, because when you have all of these flashcards and you're like, oh my gosh, if I ever get through all of these, that's why you only want to do 25 at a time. And as you're going through those, and during that week that you're working with that particular deck, if you're saying, okay, I've got majority of these down, you start pulling them out. You start pulling out the ones that, yeah, I know what that means. I know what itis means. You know what I mean? Like, I know all of these ones. So I'm going to pull these out because I already know these. Let me concentrate and focus on the ones that I don't really remember. And the ones that you are really kind of struggling to remember, then you need to draw something on that flashcard that's going to kind of give you that trigger, something to kind of make you remember anything that happens to be for, that particular thing, the prefix, the suffix, or the root word, anything. And of course I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but you can tie it to something that's going to help you to remember, right? And so that's the thing that you got to kind of like, okay, I can put this together in my brain. But yes, that's going to help you to recall those words that you're struggling to recall, or those prefixes, suffixes, or root words that you are struggling with. So that's what you want to do with that. And as you get good with those 25, then you put those aside and you go for the next 25. And then you go for the next 25. And by the time you know it, you will have cycled through 100. And then you'll have cycled through 200. And you'll have cycled through 300. So that's the whole thing, right? Is doing a little bit at a time so that you can make strides towards your goals, okay? So, to recall where we've been so far, don't overwrite the flashcards, and do not write flashcards for the guidelines, okay? Just read them, so that way you know where to go in the book for those guidelines, okay? And now the other thing, and a little controversial, because some of you really don't like when I talk about this, and we can agree to disagree, but I will say this: if you are going about it because you say, Well, Blue, this is how I learn, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Or my teacher said I need to do this, or this Facebook group said I need to do this. There's things that you will learn along the way. And one of those things is that everything that certain people say is not always applicable to you. I look at anybody who tabs, writes, or highlights in their coding manuals. These are training wheels. These are training wheels. You do not need training wheels. You need to learn to trust your book. There should not be any notes. There should not be any highlighting. And there should not be any tabs. You see all of my books back there? They are all clean. They have always been clean since I was a brand new medical coder when I got my CCA. There was not a stitch of wording on there that I put in there. Everything was the book. There was no tabs. There was no highlights. There was no nothing in those books. Those books were very clean. You have to learn to respect books. Now, I say that in the fullest sense of the word. You respect the books because these are written by doctors and scholars who know what they're doing. All you have to do is learn to use the manual. If you are not, and you're being dependent on the tabs and oh my notes and I need to transfer my notes and do all these things, guys, you will not have time to read your notes during the test. Period. You won't, because the time goes by just like that. Do I need to remind everybody that it is roughly 2 minutes per question with an AHIMA exam, and it's 2 minutes 40 seconds per question with an AAPC exam, because AAPC is exactly 100 questions and you got 4 hours. That's 240 total minutes. That's 2 minutes 40 seconds per question. Okay, so, and with AHIMA, you don't know what you're gonna get. So that's why they say it's roughly 2 minutes per question. So that's the thing that you all need to know, and you all need to start looking at it seriously that way too, because it takes time to tab your books. It does. Somebody told me that they took 8 hours to tab their books, and I said, in that 8 hours you could have been working through the workbook, and you could have been practicing, and that would have helped you a lot better than those silly tabs. The tabs also tear your book, and they also, if you are taking an AHIMA exam, and I'm not going to listen to anybody arguing with me about this because it's literally on the website, and yet I always get people who say, oh no, but my teacher said, my teacher. Okay, I'm telling you exactly what is coming from AHIMA, from their candidate hand guide. You cannot have handmade tabs on the books, period. Now, if the tabs came with the books, like the CPC, the AMA Professional Edition CPT manual, CPT manual, the CPT manual by the AMA has its own tabs. You can use those. And I've actually done a couple of demonstrations because I was getting emails and bombarded with emails and asked to demonstrate, how to tab the book, and I finally gave in, okay? And so, but I even say in the video too, on the 2 that I did already, that I don't recommend this. I recommend that you work with your book, but if you're going to tab your book, you may as well tab it right, But it still takes time to tab your books. And again, going back to the AHIMA exams, you cannot have homemade tabs. Now, AAPC, they love to tab their books. They have a whole thing about tabbing, and it's okay and things like that. And people get very excited about tabbing their books, and they show them off. They think it's, oh, look what I did. No, to me, that's showing somebody who's not learning to use their book. You want to sit here with the training wheels and have all these tabs that are going to get in your way. It's going to tear your pages. Guess what? You cannot put tape on those pages. Okay? You can't put tape. No tape, no whiteout, no none of those things. So if you have those things and they tear your pages, now you have a ratty book. And some people are very proud of their ratty book. I don't know why. Because again, you need to be able to find the codes. I would not want to work with a ratty book. Okay? And let's talk about writing in the book. There's a lot of people that say, well, how do you make notes in your book? You don't. You know why? Because all of the notes are already there in the book. You have to learn to read the book. That's it. Read the book, use the book, and that's it. Because if you are writing in it, I've seen people who show the interior of their book, and they're like, oh, look at all these notes that I did. And I'm looking like, where's the actual print of the book? Because I see highlights and tabs and all this other. No, that's confusing to me. When I see all that mess, because that's exactly what it looks like, a big old mess. But for some people, they say, well, that's just how I learn. That's how I organize things. Okay, if that's you, that's okay. You know, if that's what you want to do and you don't want to take my advice, that's totally fine. But I'm trying to reach people who are like overwhelmed and going through all these things, and it's unnecessary. The tabs, the writing, the highlighting is all unnecessary when all you have to do is learn to use the book. And I will always be an advocate for that, for using the book. When a few years ago, I had a client who told me, well, you already knew what you were doing when you took your test. That's why you didn't need tabs. Excuse me. I didn't have experience either. I had no experience in medical at all. All I had was them at the school saying, okay, well, AHIMA does not allow for any of that. Because at the time, they were very strict. You could not have no tabs. Didn't matter. You could not have tabs at all. And so they said, but you don't have to worry about all that. All you have to do is just read the book. And that's exactly what it is. It's as simple and straightforward as it is to read the book. But some of you insist on making it harder than it actually needs to be. And that's where your anxiety and all this overwhelmness comes from, is because you're trying to do too much. Instead of just sitting there with the book, working through the workbooks. And what do I mean? Like literally getting the workbooks that I recommend, the ICD-10-CM and ICD-10-PCS Coding Handbook with the Answers by Nellie Leon Chizen, that I always leave in the description box, and the CPC Study Guide. Yes, the CPC Study Guide even for AHIMA exams. Because why? The CPC Study Guide goes over all of the CPT manual that we all use. So yeah, you can use that book in order to help you to study. Okay? And I recommend that over the AHIMA exam prep guides. I don't recommend the AHIMA prep guides for the CCA, the CCS, or the CCSP. I get complaints. I'm the one who gets the complaints, guys. I'm the one who gets them. Oh, none of those questions were on the test tonight, and I memorized that whole book. Well, who told you to do that? What sense does that make to use a study guide thinking that those are the questions on the exam? If they did that, then there would be no way to gauge people's knowledge, right? So don't do that. Don't find yourself like that, okay? If you already bought it, you already bought it. You didn't know. You didn't know. But again, guys, take the time to work through the workbooks. When you find yourself thinking that you need to tab and you need to do all this writing and highlighting, spend time to work through the questions in the workbook, or to look at the book itself, so that way you can get some practice and familiarity with the book. And that's the other thing too. A lot of times people will get overwhelmed when they get into the test room because they weren't spending enough time with their books. And what do I mean when I say spend enough time? I mean 20 hours per week. There is no excuse at all whatsoever in this world that you can't put in 20 hours per week. And please do not tell me, oh no, Blue, I work a full-time 40-hour week job and I've got a family and kids. Really? I've got plenty of people on my channel who say, Blue, I followed your independent study and I've got a family and I've got kids and I've got a farm and I've got animals and I've got all these things I have to do with the church and all this other stuff. And I still made time and I passed my test. I did what you said. I put in the 20 hours and it worked. Yes, you can find time to fit in 20 hours per week. 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at lunchtime, 30 minutes on your drive home, listening to something. You can be listening to things. When you're at work and you have 30 minutes, you can be sitting there with flashcards. You can. You can be looking at the flashcards, all right? Then all you have to do is 1 hour study sessions that same day, right? You can squirrel in an hour. If you have time to be sitting there on Instagram, TikTok, all those things, you have time for that. You have time to study. You have time to pull out that workbook and be working through and looking up those codes and practicing and doing all the things that you need to do. You have time for that. That's just 2 hours, not straight in one sitting, but 1 hour, 1 hour. That's 3.5 hours you did in one day of study. Because even when you're listening, that's still considered study time. Okay? So those 3.5 hours, You do that in 5 days, that's 17 and a half hours you've done. 17 and a half hours you managed to squirrel in of study. And then all you have is the 2.5 hours on the weekend. And that's it. And then you have the rest of the weekend for Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is you want to do, your family, your kids, pets, farm animals, whatever. You have all of that time for all of those things and yourself. And you still managed to put an investment of time of 20 hours towards your goal of getting into a better career or getting into, you know, just a different line of work, right? But it's all up to you. If you're not making those efforts, if you're not sacrificing a little bit of your time, because in the grand scheme of things, 20 hours is a little bit of time, right? You don't have to go over that. Please don't go over that, because those that are, you know, if you don't have a job and this is your full-time thing and you want to do 40 hours, that's totally fine. You go right ahead and you do that. But for the vast majority of people, they have other things going on. So 20 hours is a small token of your investment in time to be able to get to where you need to go and have all that time to study and practice. Because when I hear people say, oh, I've only spent 5 hours, I've only spent 4 hours, and a lot of excuses. It's more energy to make excuses for not doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is going over your flashcards or reading the coding guidelines or listening to them, right? And I've already explained how to do it. I'm not gonna explain it again. I'm not, guys. If you can't figure it out, Google. Okay, I'm just saying. When it comes to listening to the guidelines. So that's just what I have to say today. But those are some of the mistakes that people make. You know, not putting in enough time, writing out flashcards too many for like the guidelines and stuff like that, and not reading the coding guidelines. And, you know, then tabbing, writing, highlighting, doing all these things, circling the parent code and the child code and the CPT manual. Okay. That's too much. That's too much. And if you can't pay attention to an indentation, really, you know what I'm saying? That's part of being a coder, is the detail. So don't put those training wheels on, guys, because it's not necessary. You spend more time doing that than you do studying. And are you learning? No, you're not learning. You're not learning by doing the circling. You're not learning by doing that. You're learning when you actually go through the scenarios, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay. Now I start to recognize these things. And oh yeah, I got this wrong. And I got it wrong because I looked up an open procedure instead of a laparoscopic procedure. Okay, well, I know I won't do that for the next time. You know, I'm just saying. So that's my advice anyway. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will see y'all next time. If this video helped you, please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see y'all again. Bye.